I've had those experiences of lying in bed at night, not sure how I'm going to make payroll. And that's part of what I love so much about founders and entrepreneurs is they're willing to just keep going when most people would quit.
Hey, and welcome back to the Josh Lustig Podcast. Okay, today I am super excited. We have our neighbor next door to our office here, Travis Hawks, and he is the co-founder and owner of Capital 11 Investment, like venture capital firm here in Idaho. More to come on that. Has an auto lending business, has the Blue and Orange store and a bunch of apparel stores across the country. I think like 27 of them or something crazy. So much. But anyway, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit on kind of what you're focused on right now, and then I have a bunch of questions for you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on, and excited to be here. And I'm a lifelong Boise guy, born and raised here, and we're really bullish on all the things that are happening here, and obviously do a lot of things here in Boise, but also in the wider region, the Mountain West and the Pacific Northwest, and throughout the country. But we're at our core focused on building opportunity. Building opportunity for founders and entrepreneurs we invest in, opportunity for investors and partners, and opportunity for our employees. I'm super passionate on creating as many jobs as possible and creating great jobs. So I love what I do. I love going to work every day. And, I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. So I love being around other entrepreneurs and supporting other entrepreneurs. And working with other entrepreneurs, a lot of our investor base are people who are entrepreneurs and had great successes, and so we're aligned in that.
Well, you've had like incredible business success, and a lot of people that hang out with me, they just have an affinity, like they want to learn more about business, family life, all that kind of stuff. How did you come up with the idea of you have all these different businesses? How did you get into like the VC side specifically? Because you guys are one of the only not the only game in town in Idaho, but from my understanding, most venture capital firms will invest in all over the place, and you have a pretty strong focus in Idaho companies and building, here. I went to for context, went to your building. It's an amazing building. You've got probably how many employees you guys have now?
There in the building, we have 65 or 70.
Yeah, and then you have others across the country, and it's unbelievable what you built. So I'm just fascinated personally. How did you get into the VC side, and maybe tell a little bit of your background story and how you got into it?
Yeah. So again, I think at its core, it starts with just the fact that I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a founder. I've started multiple businesses. I've always, from the time I was a young kid, I knew I wanted to just start my own businesses and kind of, that's what always appealed to me. I've always loved the idea of small business. I've always loved the idea of you can just, in this country, start your own business and turn that into a great success. And so we started Capital 11. David, my co-founder, and I started it about 16 years ago. When we started it, we were doing real estate. We were doing some different lending things. You mentioned we started an auto lending company. So we didn't start right away with the venture. But in January of 2019, we decided to start this venture capital side of our business. And it was really started because one, it's back to loving founders and entrepreneurs and wanting to support them. And then two, really seeing a market opportunity in the Treasure Valley here in the Boise area, but also a market need because it was so undersaturated, from a capital perspective. We felt like this ecosystem was really ready to start spinning, so we talk about the flywheel, getting going and spinning, but it needed capital to do that. And we kind of looked around and it was like, if not us, who? And so we started doing that. We started to seed stage invest. That's a tongue twister. About 6.5 years ago. And fast forward to now, we've invested in over 70 companies. We target it to be about 50% Idaho-based companies and then 50% kind of all over. We're kind of geographic agnostic on the other
Mm.
50%, but as you'd imagine, relationship wise, proximity wise, there's more of a concentration in those Mountain West states. And it's been awesome. I love it. I love working with founders. They're doing the hardest possible thing, and we're all of us that are doing this are kind of crazy, because it's so hard. And I'm always amazed by situations where a startup that's maybe 3 or 4 months from running out of cash is on the phone with a Fortune 100 company and closing a deal. Like, it just shouldn't work and it shouldn't make sense, but somehow it works. And there's a lot of ups and downs, but those highs are really high.
So I'm curious, like you mentioned like how crazy it is to be an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
and like certainly I've had some of those moments. What are maybe some of the moments in time where it's like, like sitting there at night, going like, oh man, I don't know if we're gonna make it tomorrow,
Yeah.
or like, what are some of the like the lower moments in
Yeah.
your entrepreneur journey?
Well, yeah, I mean, I share, and I share this with founders when we're pitching them to invest, is that I understand kind of what they're going through or what they're going to go through, because firsthand I've had those experiences of lying in bed at night not sure how I'm going to make payroll. And that's a really hard thing to deal with. I mean, that's a terrible feeling. Also, as you know, when you're the owner, when you're the entrepreneur, you get paid last. So if there's a lot of money, that's great to get paid last. But if there's no money, that means you get no money.
Mm,
And so I understand that journey. I've lived that. I have started businesses that failed. I have, again, had businesses that ultimately were successful, but had the near death experience that most businesses have at some point. So I've experienced that, as an owner, as an entrepreneur, and now experience it on a regular basis with companies that we invest in. And I always call it the, laying in the street bleeding. You're bleeding in the street, and you oftentimes are dealing with all these people around you that are like, what are you doing?
mm,
It could be a spouse, it could be a parent that's
yeah.
just like, why are you doing this? And that's part of what I love so much about founders and entrepreneurs, is they're willing to just keep going when most people would quit.
Why do you think that? Like, what would you attribute like getting through? Like, maybe pick a specific moment for
Yeah.
context. It's like I'm rock bottom. Maybe you're talking to your wife, or I don't know, those conversations, and you're
Yeah.
like, what are you feeling in that moment, in this story, and like how do you like bootstrap your way out of it? Because
Yeah.
like there are some moments, at least for me, and I'm still young. I'm trying to figure life out. I'm not pretending I have all the wisdom in the world, but I'm going, damn, how are we gonna figure this out? And I start to like have to fight my own battles in my own head. Like, okay, remember all these different things. Like, how do you go about that, or how have you gone about getting from the low to like, okay, now we're gonna start climbing the hill again, and brush our shoes off, so to speak.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think the answer to that is probably a little different for everybody, kind of
Mm,
what gets them through those really hard times and those near death experiences. For me, I would say it falls in one of three categories. One is, or all of them,
mm,
maybe, but one is just definitely a self belief of just like, I always feel like I can find success and find a way out. So I'm not really thinking like failure is going to happen. There's a
yeah.
lot of self belief that just we can figure it out. Second thing that's kind of related to that is just, I don't want to quit, right? I don't want to quit. I don't want to show that example to others, to my kids, to others, that like I quit. Now, sometimes, like I said, I've had businesses that fail. Like, sometimes that becomes the only option, but I want it to be the last possible option, right? I don't
Mm,
want to quit. And then the third thing is, I do feel always this responsibility to employees, to people who have trusted me with their livelihood to sign on to my business. And that responsibility, weighs heavy. So I there's definitely been times in my life where I've been like, I've gotta find a way through this, because I can't let down those people who chose to come work for me over other options, and who believed in me.
mm.
And so that, becomes a driving force, for me. So Usually it's one of those three things or all of those, combined through those moments in my life.
I think it's so interesting, like, the third one especially for me, and this is more relevant to me now than maybe before. Some of the other ones were before, but it's like the moments in time where I find myself actually like there's an actual responsibility to other human beings, right? If it's just me in a vacuum and it's
Yeah.
just me and whatever, I can pivot. It's much harder to pivot or to quit or to do whatever when other people rely on you, when you are actually serving someone else in that capacity. But those are always the times, at least in my short life so far, those have been the times when I'm really serving. I'm doing this business. I'm doing this for like a real mission rather than just a commission. Those are the times where I actually have the biggest growth. Those seasons where it's not just about me, it's about so many other people because you just don't feel like, you feel like quitting, but you just know you can't because like there's no other option. Like burn the boats, as the cliche goes. So I'm curious, how many pitches do you think you've sat through? So like, actually,
Oh
before
my
I go into
goodness.
that, why don't you explain venture capital and
Yeah.
like just for somebody that has, I imagine I have no idea what it's like. Explain like what VC is to maybe a business owner that doesn't know much.
Yeah, and VC can be a little different from place to place, firm to firm. So I'll explain at least through what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're probably unique in the sense that because we feel this need to really help the local ecosystem, we sit through a lot of pitches because we have an internal rule that anyone that is building a business in Boise, we will meet with them.
Wow.
Even if we know going in, we can tell by the pitch deck or the idea or whatever, like there's no way we're going to invest in this. Most VCs are not going to, quote, waste time meeting with someone that they're not going to invest in. We view it a little differently as we're trying to help build this ecosystem. And so we can provide mentorship and guidance and help. But also we feel like those types of things will come full circle. And if maybe they introduce us to someone, maybe they come back with a different idea in a couple years because they know us and we treated them well and those types of things. So
Wait, hold on. I want to
yeah,
stop on that for a second.
yeah,
You will literally meet with anyone looking for funding that's building a Boise based in
yes,
Idaho, in Boise.
yes,
You will meet with them even if you know it's literally a waste of your time.
yes, yes.
That's like a company-wide stance.
Yes, and we
Wow.
have rethought this before because it does take a lot of time,
Yeah.
but we just come back to this is the right thing to do for this ecosystem, and that again, in the end, like we will benefit. We'll benefit because, rising tide lifts all boats when it comes to the ecosystem, but also we just believe in building bridges and treating people well. And, maybe this guy comes in with a terrible idea, but we're nice to him. We give him advice. We give him honest feedback. But then he tells someone else that's looking for funding that has a great idea and they walk through our door. So
Yeah.
we just believe that in the full circle of things that there'll be an ROI on that. But it is a lot. But where we are investing is primarily entering at early stage. So that may be, pre-seed, seed plus. I mean, these are generally early days. We're investing mostly in software companies, technology companies. And we're writing anywhere from a $250,000 to a $1 million first check investment into those companies. And, venture, there's certainly critics of venture, but what I say is there's good and bad. There's good actors and bad actors in all things. So yeah, certainly there's bad actors in venture capital. There's
Yeah.
people that are unfair to founders or take advantage of founders and things like that. We run across those people sometimes. We again, back to our core of wanting to support and help founders and entrepreneurs and help build an ecosystem here. We can't, we're not going to be that way, and we're all about
Yeah.
creating win-win relationships. But we also say that taking venture capital funding is not right for most businesses.
Yeah.
Venture capital is really built around companies that can really scale. So
Yeah.
if you're wanting to build a business that someday is going to be worth $10 million, like that's amazing. That could be a great lifestyle business for you, a great outcome for you and your family. That's not a venture-backed company,
Yeah.
right?
It's not going to go to $1 billion. It's not
Right.
going to go to $500 million.
Right. Yeah,
That's really where you're looking to invest for both parties' sake, right? 'Cause
absolutely.
are you taking a percentage? So like, I know some of the answers, but I also am a little fuzzy on some of
Yeah.
them. So like, are you taking mainly, so let's say you invest $500,000
hmm
into this round of funding. There's other, that's not the total round, right? Let's say someone's seeking a $2 million, round, which is fairly big or small, I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's say you guys invest 500,000, or are you normally taking the majority, stance on that?
In most cases, we are not taking the whole rounds
Mm-hmm.
because we are generally entering at a stage where someone's raising like $2 million. That's a good
Mm-hmm.
example, and so we're doing again maybe 500 of that on average.
Gotcha.
Sometimes if it's a pre-seed, we may be taking all the round because the total they're raising at that point is only $500,000. But generally in venture rounds, they're going to take anywhere from a 10 to 25% dilution. So they're essentially going to be, giving anywhere from 10 to 25% equity in the company for those investment dollars.
Mm,
I'm really passionate about telling founders to try and limit dilution to 20% in a round. And
yeah.
then the idea is you take that dilution, but then the company grows, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in value before you need to take the next dilution. And then you're taking another, 15 or 20% dilution, but then hopefully you're growing that 3 or 4 times. So in the long run, the idea is, yeah, you could just bootstrap it on your own, but it would be very, very rare for a company to be worth $1 billion through bootstrapping, right?
Yeah.
So you need that capital to accelerate the growth
Mm,
and take advantage of the market opportunity, and that capital speeds up the time frame that otherwise it's going to take you 25 years to build the company, at which point the market opportunity is gone in most
yeah.
cases, right? That market opportunity doesn't last for 25 years
Right. You have a
normally.
competitive edge now. You need to
Yes.
scale it, but I don't have $5 million to scale, or whatever
Yeah,
the case may be. I need to go get it from somebody that does, and they also get the benefit of your network and some insights, I'm guessing,
absolutely.
along the way, because you have a vested interest in that. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know much about that world until I started hanging out with you guys,
Yeah.
in this ecosystem, if you will. So, how many pitches do you think you've heard? Like, if you had to just like throw a random guess at it.
Yeah. I mean, again, we've been doing it 6.5 years. I mean, thousands for sure. Because it's a, not necessarily a daily occurrence, but multiple times a week. I'm hearing some pitches, and pitches can range. A lot of times, especially for companies out of town, it'll start with just like an intro call. We'll jump on a 30-minute, Zoom
Yep.
call, hear what they're building, see how interesting that sounds. Does it make sense for us to dive in? When we have them come into the office, which obviously is the local people, those generally are about 45-minute meetings.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do is we organize what we call a pitch day. We started this a few years ago, and it's about every other week. And so about every other week, the team will, clear their calendar for the whole day, and we will and it's exhausting,
I'm sure.
but it's nice because when you meet with 7 or 8, founders or founding teams in the same day,
Mm,
becomes, really easy to kind of compare and contrast the teams, because that's a big thing when you're doing early stage investment. It's about the team more so than the idea.
you're like actually investing in you're betting on the person more so than the product or service, really.
Absolutely, because people ask, what's more important, team or product, and it's team, because a bad team is never going to be able to execute even on a good idea or a good product. Whereas if it's a good team and a bad product, they can pivot, right? They can evolve, pivot, change, which is very common. Like most successful, tech companies started out building something different than where they ended.
Mm,
So it really is about the team. And because it's so early when we're investing, there's a limited amount of product market fit, if any. And, it's the financials are, I mean, you can't due diligence your way to a decision
mm.
based on financials and projections and things like that. So you really are, in the end, betting on the team. And, do you believe that founder or founding team can go out and execute and pivot, as needed or if needed?
So I'm super fascinated. Like, so what are you looking for after seeing all these different
Yeah,
pitches? I don't know if it's like a science or if it's more of an art.
definitely an art.
More of an art. So like,
hmm
what are you kind of generally looking
Yeah.
for, out of a let's say 8 people pitch today, or just like present. I know there's a connotation to the word pitch, but
Yeah.
8 people come and present to you their ideas. What are you looking for? The reason I'm asking is I believe in our mission is to teach human skills in an AI world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the technology is amazing, and it really is. And like the things that are coming out, cutting edge science stuff, it's incredible. And that stuff, the hard skills are really important. But I'm so passionate about what you just said is like, hey, those products and those technologies, that's really important. Those tools are good, but it really comes down to who's wielding them. And if you can't present in front of a team, in front of a group, and get your point across and, show confidence in who you are, you're gonna have a really long road as an entrepreneur. So like, what are some of those skills that you find is like most important, whether it's pitches or just people in general?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'm definitely a big soft skills guy, right, and believer in that because sales is a part of any entrepreneur's journey, like a critical
Mm,
part of sales,
mm-hmm.
because first of all, most software companies are going to require the founder to be able to successfully sell the product in the early days. Like you can't out of the gate hire a great sales team. You can't afford them,
Yeah.
right? So we look a lot at founder-led sales. Can the founder go out and close deals, land
Mm,
clients? And if they can't do that, that makes it hard. Now, sometimes you have the rare person that is just so technically incredible, like a Mark Zuckerberg, that you can say, okay, he doesn't need the sales side because he's just so technically incredible.
like the idea is so
Yeah.
good, and
And
the
his
ability to
execution,
execute on
exactly.
it.
His vision,
We could find a salesperson that could probably
yes.
sell this
But
product, but
those
that's
those are so rare, right?
yeah.
That 99% of founders are going to need to be able to go out and close deals and land sales. But it's not just customers, and this is why I go back to it's sales and everything, because they're going to need to attract great talent. They're going to need to hire people that are really talented. That's sales. If I'm trying to get you to work for me, I've got to sell you on me, on the company, on the opportunity, on the vision,
Mm,
right? And then also with investors. I mean, that's the other thing too, is when they're coming in and pitching, they're trying to sell us on investing in their company. And if you're a venture-backed company, you're going to need to continue to do that, right?
mm.
With multiple investors across multiple rounds. So that's we're looking at those types of things. Can they sell? Obviously, leadership things. Do we feel like they can lead a team, which again goes into attracting talent? Do we believe they're coachable? That goes back to the pivot, question. Sometimes people are so stubborn on their vision and their idea that maybe they're not going to listen to the market or to customers or to others, and so they won't adjust, they won't pivot. That's not good.
Mm.
So those are kind of things we're going to look at from founders, certainly experience and some, it is a lot art. And so it's just, the feel, and do you believe in this person? Now there is certainly in the underwriting, due diligence, a component, a big component to the idea. I don't want to make it seem like the idea doesn't matter, because it certainly does. It's just that team is more important to us than idea. But when it comes to the idea, we're looking at what is the market size, for this idea? What's the competitive landscape? What's the moat? Is this something that can easily be replicated? And I heard on a podcast, I think it was the founder of Carta that said, which this kind of resonated with me, said, for someone to invest, they need to care about the problem. And I think there's some truth to that. Sometimes you meet with someone, they may have a great idea, a great product, but if it's not something that, if it doesn't resonate with you as an investor, sometimes it's just hard to get to wanting to invest. But
Mm.
if someone comes in and they're saying something that you really understand that value prop, and you'd be interested in being a customer, or you really understand why people would be a customer, or you see that this would be really meaningful, that can certainly make a difference. But
So
again,
you're saying
it
like
is
make
more
it.
art than science.
You're saying like make it personal, like in a
When you
way,
can, for sure. Yeah,
like
I think I mean, I'm a personal connection when it comes to sales. Like I feel like
yeah.
that's the best way to sell, but people have different styles.
I very much agree with you.
Yeah.
And as we're, building out our insurance company, and we actually turned that into more of a consulting business. We had, we added that on as a service, and we helped other insurance agents scale their businesses. people that are maybe making 6 figures and want to make 7 figures and beyond. We'd help them, come to our mastermind, and we'd coach them on certain things on the sales and marketing. And I definitely have found the people that have all the spreadsheets in the world, let's say they're brand new. They left their corporate job. They have all these spreadsheets. They have all this, due diligence type background that they can do. And they have this 400-page business plan. And it actually is very good. Like, it's very technically sound. The math lines up and the scaling. We're going to hire someone at 3 months and 90 days in, and then we're going to do this and all this sequential stuff. And then I say, well, how many phone calls have you made so far? Like, you've been in business, you quit 2 months ago. How many phone calls have you made to try to get customers? Crickets.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is the lifeblood of a business, is the ability to go out as the founder, as the person who the buck stops with me, is go out and say, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to call people. I'm going to pitch them my idea until it either kills me or this thing works. And I think that you just mentioned, there's that level of grit and the ability to go out and sell and to say, hey, this is deeply personal to me as the owner of this company. I think that gives you a lot of grit and sticking power.
No question. The grit is a non-negotiable requirement, for any founder to be successful. And I think it's for two reasons. One is exactly what you just illustrated of, it's hard to go out and sell. It's hard to lock down customers. Back to my earlier example, to, get on the phone when you're about out of money and try and land a Fortune 100 company. That's hard. So the grit is required for that. But it also goes back to what we were talking about earlier with those near-death experiences and those, when you're laying in the street bleeding, it takes grit to stand up, to dust yourself off, to keep going. And it's unnatural, right? It's the natural thing is to quit, is to listen to the detractors and the haters. And so, yeah, absolutely, we're looking for founders who have that grit and that hustle and have that self-belief that they're not gonna accept failure, even when everyone is telling them they're wrong and they're crazy. They're gonna just keep running.
As a young person, rewind a little bit back to, let's say, 20-year-old, Travis.
Yeah.
If someone's listening to this and they're 20 or 25 or whatever, and they're considering all their options ahead of them, there's a bunch of things. How do you start to develop more of this self-belief? Because you've mentioned it a few times today.
Yeah.
There's just this overwhelming self-belief, and not, certainly there's some people out there that portray that in an arrogant way. You're so understated. There's just this actual, I think it's confidence, not some, arrogance. How do you develop that level of self-belief, self-confidence? Is it something that you're just born with, or is it something that you can work on and develop over time, especially as a young man?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that it can be both. I think that people, some people just inherently have that, as a gift, something they're born with. It definitely can be developed. I think the idea of, confidence versus arrogance is kind of a good discussion. And how I have learned to view that is, arrogance is when you don't feel like you can learn anything. Arrogance is when you feel like you're the smartest guy in the room, you have all the answers, and you don't need to listen to anybody or learn anything. Confidence, you can have that self-belief and you can believe that you can lead people and go execute and be successful, but you're also willing to listen. You're willing to take feedback. In our business, we tell all of our employees, sure, we have an org chart, but we don't run things in a way that a big corporation does, where you're not allowed to go talk to someone that's not your direct report. Anyone can come sit down in my office and talk to me. And I feel like that helps, from a culture, perspective, but also you can get good ideas from anybody. And so I think being willing to listen and learn is really critical. And you can have self-belief and believe in your vision and still be willing to listen and learn. So I think that's critical. As far as how you would be self-taught when it comes to self-belief and confidence in those things, as crazy as it may sound, I do think that there is kind of a fake it until you get there mentality to it. You have to just, it's no different than being disciplined in any other way. You have to just push yourself of I can do this. I know how to do it. I think it's easy sometimes to look at other people and say, oh, they're so smart, they're so accomplished. They're just all regular people, right?
Mm,
And I think we sometimes limit ourselves and put a ceiling on ourselves because we think that these others that have been successful have a better education or better resources or something. And so I think we're limiting ourselves.
mm,
And so if you just take the ceiling off yourself and say I can get there, and you just propel yourself, eventually you'll go from doubting but trying to believing,
mm.
right? And so I think it's not something that just is easy or comes naturally to everyone. And I think that self-doubt and those types of things are very natural. Some people may
Yeah,
listen to this and be like, oh man, like I have all kinds of self-doubt and anxieties and things like that. And that's normal. Like very
yeah,
successful, self-confident people have self-doubt and nervousness and anxieties. You
yeah,
just don't know that they do. And
yeah.
so that psychs you out.
You don't know that they're comparing themselves. You might be comparing yourself to this guy, but this guy's comparing himself to Elon Musk.
100%.
It's like,
100%.
whether this person you idolize or look up to in whatever category is, in your opinion, in your head, your limiting belief, they're smarter, they have a better education, they come from a different, demographic, they come from a different household than you, they're smarter, they're better looking, whatever it is. I love what you're saying. Because it's like everybody goes through those moments. It's not like anyone's immune to the comparison game, but it's like so important to turn it off. And what we're finding is we interviewed a bunch of college kids, like from fraternities and from some sororities here at BSU, and we're finding that one of the biggest upsides right now for this generation is the idea that there's so much information readily available.
Yeah.
Like there is so much information that I think that for that reason alone, they have the ability, people in their 20s right now have the ability to become the greatest generation because of just the sheer access to knowledge. But there is a kicker, there's a downside, pros and cons to everything. The con is you're constantly, it's not like you're just like comparing yourself to the Joneses next door. You're constantly comparing yourself to hundreds, if not thousands, of people on the internet all day, every day. There's so many options that it's hard to choose one. And so I guess I have two questions. I'll start with the first one is like, what would you tell someone that's maybe like trying to figure out like how to turn off the comparison game? Like, it used to be, hey, Jim, my neighbor, has a Mercedes.
Yeah.
So now, okay, if I want to keep up with the Joneses, I got to get a Mercedes. These 21-year-olds are seeing 21-year-olds on the internet driving Lambos and pulling up to mansions. Half of it's fake anyway. What would you tell somebody like that? Like, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem and a
Mm,
huge detriment, to that to kind of all people that are on social media and those things, but especially to that generation. And I think, two things. I think one is you really should just as best you can limit your exposure. Limit your exposure to Instagram and TikTok. I mean, those are time wasters.
mm,
And I don't, they are things that just can lead people into feeling worse about themselves, because of what you see,
mm.
right? So I think limiting it, you're unlikely to find a lot of success simply by scrolling, those apps,
Just
right?
doom scrolling at
Yeah, I mean, it's
10:30
just it's such a
p.m.
waste of time, right?
Yeah.
When you could be doing other things. But I think the other part of that is understanding that so much of it is not real, and that's the thing. And even back to your earlier example of like my neighbor got a Mercedes, like one of the things I have really learned as now we have investors, we take investment capital. I mean, I had someone in my office, recently that if you saw him at the grocery store or the Boise State game or whatever, I mean, you would think that he was blue collar, very little money, struggling to make ends meet, maybe just based on kind of the way he was, the way he dressed, everything else, right? Like because he was the opposite of what you're talking about with the Lamborghini, right?
Mhm.
Well, the guy sold his business for over $100 million. And on the flip side, I've talked to people, met with people, know people who the perception is maybe they have all this success because of the car they drive or the watch they wear, or the house that they live in, or whatever else. But they don't have any liquidity. Like, they don't have any money in the bank, right? Like, they're leveraged to the hilt, right? There's a big difference between the guy in an $800,000 house that he owns and the guy in a $4 million house that owns $4 million, right? And the guy with the $800,000 house paid in full has much more wealth, right? So it is like you said, so much of it is fake that you see, or just trying to get attention, or trying to get followers to benefit, sell something, whatever. You've just got to understand, like, so much of that is fake, and then just limit your exposure, because it's going to put you in a negative mind space of thinking like, oh, I'm 26 and I don't have a private plane like this guy on Instagram, so I'm failing, when that's crazy.
It's insane. And like, sometimes you get caught in the trap, and it's like you're kind of motivated by some of it. At least this is my experience. You're kind of motivated by some of it, obviously, but then you're also very discouraged by it. It's a weird thing. You're like, I'm glad that I know that exists, but I kind of like, I don't want to see it every hour of the day.
And I think it's more common, honestly, for people to feel discouraged than motivated.
That's a hard
setting.
It's a hard pill to swallow.
In a TikTok, Instagram, flamboyant, posters following, I think it does lead people to discouragement. And we're talking about it from a wealth perspective, but there's also from a beauty perspective, and from a, fashion perspective. And it's like, in this, it's just, and again, it's back to, it's not real. Like you see these, maybe you're out at the beach and you see people spend 4 hours with external lighting and doing all these things to get the perfect photo that they then edit, that then they post, and you're like, oh my gosh, that person is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Because they make it look like this was just a 30-second selfie.
Right? Hashtag candid, hashtag blessed.
Right, exactly. When they literally have a whole crew there, with makeup, light, everything, and then they're still just editing the photo anyway. So that's why you just like the less exposure you have to those things, the better.
Like, sometimes I love that. Is like, you took it a different direction. I thought you were going to go a different way, but like, sometimes it's not about managing it. Sometimes it's about just like removing it from your
100%.
life. It's like, if I don't know, if I'm not looking at it, do I even know that it exists? Like, how can I feel a certain way if I don't allow myself to even go there in the first place? You said a story, or an analogy about like the people that are rich versus the people that just look rich. I'll tell you a quick story. My dad was a manager of a bank, one of the youngest managers of a bank in rural Idaho, up in central Idaho. And there's this guy from Oregon that comes in, and just a crotchety old cowboy looking guy, fairly common in that part. Drives up in this beat up old pickup, don't remember the brand, just beat the heck up. The box is almost not even on there anymore. And he walks into the bank, and he asks the front desk for a loan. He's picking up some feed, and he's bringing it back to Oregon. He's a cattle rancher, supposedly a big cattle rancher out in Oregon. And they say, well, I can't. He's asking like a $300,000, like, I'm picking up a lot of feed. They're shipping trucks, And so I got to ask my manager. So he goes up to my dad, who's the manager of the bank, and he goes, I don't know, like, how about, he wanted to be polite, but it like definitely didn't look like this is a loan that we should be making. Yeah. Oh, I'll pay it back when I get back to Oregon. And so my dad says, well, I actually am going to go to lunch. If you want to go to lunch, we'll talk to the management team and we'll have an answer in about, 45 minutes. He calls the Oregon branch of the bank that this gentleman is from over in Oregon. And they're like, oh yeah, just give him whatever he wants. And he's like, what? What do you mean give him? Are you sure you have the right name? Check the system again. He's like, oh yeah, like, turns out this guy's a multi-millionaire, has been forever, but looks like he doesn't have two pennies rubbed together. And I just love that story. He also said something, shout out to my dad. He also said, everyone, like, I'm enamored by some of these people, right? Especially a few years ago. And it's like very easy to be enamored by the people that are way more successful than you. He goes, Josh, I don't know if you realize that every person puts their pants on the same way that you do every morning, one leg at a time. I was like, dang. So like, a lot of this advice is very good, and I appreciate you bringing it.
Yeah, and I think that last part is critical because, I graduated from Boise State. I'm proud of that. I'm a lifelong, Bronco. But I think, sometimes there can be this perception out there that like, oh, if you're not Harvard educated, you're inferior, Ivy League educated, whatever it may be. And so whenever I talk to Boise State students, I'm like, don't ever think that you're second rate. Like we are here in Meridian, Idaho, working side by side with, some of the largest venture and private equity firms in the country. And there's never been a time where they're like, well, where'd you get your degree from? Well, okay, you're secondary in this transaction, or we don't care about your opinion. Like, it doesn't matter. Like,
Mm,
it's about like what you can do, what your experience is, what you can deliver, and it's about just a lot bigger things, like, back to those issues of finding the win-win and integrity and all of those types of things. And so I think that can be something too that can hold people back sometimes,
mm-hmm.
is they're like, oh, well, I didn't, get the Ivy League education, or I didn't get this internship, at Goldman or whatever it is. And so they start to think that they're secondary to someone else. And it's just not true. And that
Mm.
comes back to, fighting through those natural self-doubts and getting more into that, self-belief.
I love that. And like you'll be kind of almost like your actions will dictate your results, not the pedigree that you have. Whether it's,
100%.
your family or whether it's your college pedigree, whatever that is. I went to college for 4 months. It actually was fairly easy for me. Just that's something that comes a little bit naturally for me. But I got into it and I was just like not going, like I wasn't going down a bad path. Like I wasn't into drugs and all that. I don't want it to sound like that. But I was starting to realize that like some of the things that I thought just a couple months prior were like, I had a really strong stance on. I was already just the environment that I was in.
Mm.
I was already starting to be like, I don't know if that's such a bad thing or if that's such a big deal. My belief systems were starting to kind of like fade a little bit, like get watered down. And I just started looking at my life. I'm just like zoom out and I'm like, we're partying too much, drinking too much. And for me, I was just like, this isn't what I want. I want to get married to my girlfriend at the time. So we did. We got married at 19. So I
Mm.
left college 4 months into it. Never looked back, and it's certainly not the path for everybody, but it worked for us. What are your thoughts on college? Like just modern day. I know there's so much to this topic because
Yeah.
the college today is not the same as it was 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 60 years ago. But like, what are your views on college like today? Is it
Yeah.
worth going, not worth going, for who, why?
Yeah, great conversation. We could talk hours just for this. And I'll maybe start by just giving the lens through my own kids. My oldest daughter, she's always wanted to be a school teacher. She went and got a 4-year degree to be a school teacher. Like, that makes sense because that's what she wanted to do. It's a requirement, right? It's a
Uh-huh.
requirement to get there. My second child, my son, he's more of a entrepreneur, good at sales, good at relationships, things like that. Didn't love school.
Hmm.
And so I told him, like, I don't feel like you need to graduate from college. Like, if you're going to want to go start your own business, if you're going to want to do your own thing, like, I don't feel like that is necessary. So I think part of it depends on what you want to do.
Hmm.
I know from a hiring perspective, I am much more concerned about someone's actual skills, abilities, and experience than if they have a degree or not.
Yeah.
And so I think if you have the opportunity, if a degree is not required to what you want to do, if you do want to start your own business, or you want to be in, whatever type of business you want to be in, if there's opportunities to go work in those types of businesses, without school or instead of school, like, I just think gaining that life experience is most important. And then I think the other kind of conversation around college now, as we're in 2025, is that the system is pretty broken, in my opinion. And it's been broken for a while from a cost perspective,
Hmm.
because the costs have just gone up because the grants and scholarships and, things that government support and things, like, as those numbers go up, colleges just raise their fees. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of good stuff you can read about, the administration inside colleges has gotten so much bigger, and what they're spending just on buildings and other things is so much bigger. Like
It's a business. It's a
it's a
big business,
business,
a big
right?
one.
It's a big
Yeah.
business, and it's a pretty broken system. But also now in this emerging AI world where so much of what is happening in college you can easily kind of cheat to get through and basically not really be learning things because you can just use AI for much of what you're having to pass. I'm just, again, it's back to the soft skills. Like what colleges, in my opinion, need to do is teach people how to work on teams, teach people how to start a business, teach
Mm.
people the different facets. Obviously I'm looking through a business lens. If you're going to be a doctor, it's a different conversation, but through a business lens,
Mm.
like teach people what goes into starting a business, teach people to really understand P&Ls and balance sheets and financials, right?
Sales and
Yeah,
marketing and
sales, like what goes into sales and how do you sell and how do you work with a team and how do you work with,
hmm
other people that aren't the same as you. And it really is to me about developing those soft skills and providing experience. I feel like that's where the value comes and less about like, hey, let's use this as a sorting process by putting people through a gauntlet where they're going to have to pass, a calculus class and a chemistry class and these different things to just prove like
mm.
they can start here, they can make it 4 years and come out with acceptable grades that now qualify for them, for a job. I just feel like that is a broken system, let alone if it is coupled with people having huge amounts of student debt when they get out, then they've really put themselves in a hard position.
Yeah, it's like in 2025 for colleges, like with AI, information is now free.
Right.
Better information than you can get from a human is now free.
Yep.
So like you have to really consider if you're going to go to business school. Let's just talk about that because we're both business guys. Again, attorneys, doctors, whatever. We need those. But there's a problem we can talk about there too. Is like what's the financial incentive to be an attorney when you could be a business person, leverage some AI, and make 3 times more money with none of the student debt? So like I don't want to promote that too much because I want doctors in this world.
Sure.
I don't know what the financial incentive is to be a doctor right now
Yeah.
or an attorney. But anyway, from a business school standpoint, information is now free because of AI. And so my thesis and going into the next few years is very similar to yours is colleges and programs and schools should be teaching the human skills, all the things that you just mentioned, and being an accountability partner because like some guardrails. Like otherwise, like a coach. I think the coaching industry is going to take off, not from like a I'm selling information standpoint, because even in like the business world, selling information is now going to be going away. You can just get it on the internet for free.
Yeah.
But what do you do with the information? How do we help people, whether a college student or a business looking for consulting advice? How do you help them take the free advice and literally implement it, like in the physical world? Because there is a very large gap there from at least what I've been witnessing is like all the information and book smarts in the world. How do we put that into immediate action? You are someone that just like, you're out here taking actions all day, every day. What's a couple of things that like have helped you like have the mindset of like, okay, knowing is one thing, but I have to literally like go do something now? Is that just a natural ability or is that something that you can like kind of train yourself on, like take action now kind of a stuff?
Yeah, I think again, similar to the other question, I think it can be both. I think some of it can be natural ability, but it also can be learned. And I think for me, key part of that has been to not be afraid of failure. I
Mm,
think that that's a thing that can really hold people back in decision making and taking action and doing whatever as if they're scared to fail. And you have to be willing to take those risks, I think, in whatever you're doing. And it's interesting because people are so worried about failing, even starting a company, worried about failing, whatever. And I understand it because it can be embarrassing, I guess, to go back to family and friends and say that this failed. But again, we have such a long history of successful entrepreneurs who failed in multiple businesses before they were successful. And we kind of celebrate that all the time. Yet from an individual, inward looking, we're like, oh, I can't fail. And so that's why I already said on this podcast, like I've started businesses that failed. Like I always say that because I want people, like I had someone just recently being like, man, everything you do is successful. And it's like, well, that's because that's the things you see and that maybe I'm promoting, talking about, right?
That's because those things are still around.
That's right. That's the perception, because I don't stand up and talk about these businesses that failed, right, on a regular basis, or you've never heard of them, or you didn't know me then, or whatever else. But you can't be afraid to fail. You can't be afraid to experiment. It's kind of like the paralysis of indecision sometimes that can come into people's minds. And it is just, I think it's back to what is so important is just people having experience. And that experience doesn't all have to be that they made perfect decisions and everything worked out good. You learn as much or more with those bad decisions that you made, with those failures. Like you learn more with that. And so part of the need to go take action and do things and risk failure is so that you can get those reps and have those experiences, which is going to make you better the next time.
The failures teach you just as much as the successes. Sometimes
usually
more.
I think usually more.
I don't know if you're open to sharing, but like, what's maybe one of the worst, like the worst failure situations, businesses, situation stories that you've been a part of?
Yeah, I mean, there's been multiple, but and it's actually kind of a cool story because of how it comes full circle after the failure. But me and a different business partner, a good friend of mine, we had come across this franchise that was opening spas. So like you get this is so crazy that we would think we would have expertise in this, but like get your eyebrows waxed and these different kind of spa services, and they were opening them inside Walmart stores. And so they had this kind of master agreement with Walmart, and the idea was that you're kind of bringing these types of services to kind of everybody, right? Because prices were lower, you were inside a Walmart, so someone who's never going to walk into the really fancy, expensive salon and is going to feel intimidated to even walk in can now have these services accessible.
This is designed for the Walmart customer.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. So I like that idea. And so we did that. We bought 3 franchises, and we opened the first one actually here in the Treasure Valley in Nampa. And hired people, opened it, put built out the space, all those things, and it that business never made money and ultimately failed. And it's kind of a long story, kind of all the aftermath of that. So, that was something way outside of my wheelhouse, but, we did it. We tried it. We put all that we, could into it to make it successful, and it ultimately was not successful. And overall, the concept was flawed. A lot of them failed. But one of the cool things that came out of that was we hired somebody. At first, we were kind of running it. We'd hired a manager and stuff, but our idea was to grow this to 3, 5, 10 locations, right? So we hired someone that my partner knew, and he was a younger guy, had another good job, had a finance background, but was a charismatic guy. And so we sold him on the vision of, hey, you can come. He didn't want to run this, eyebrow place in Walmart, but we sold him on this vision of, hey, we can build 10 of these. We'll give you equity. We can sell these in 7 years. Like, this will be a great thing. And I remember sitting with him in my office, in my old office, and he said, because he was leaving a very stable job, a good job that he would never lose, stable job, to take a risk, right, on this new venture. And I remember him saying to me, what if this fails? Like, what if I jump into this, leave my other job, and this thing fails and we close this down? And I said, if that happens, we will just go find something else to do. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
we're smart guys. Like, we'll go find something else to do. Like, sure,
Yeah.
it might fail, but
Yeah.
if it does, we'll find something else. So it did fail. And then I sat down with him when I told him that, hey, we're going to close this thing. We're going to pull the plug. And I said, hey, we're starting this new business. It's an auto lending business. And don't know what's going to happen. This is why I'm excited about it. This is what we're going to do. What do you think about coming in and working for this auto lending business? He did. And now he's the president of our auto
No
lending
way.
business. Yeah.
Wow. Look, and you wouldn't have found that person if you wouldn't have done
No.
the bad idea.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That's some of the biggest lessons come from
And
that.
from his perspective, he wouldn't be in the position he's in today, which is, key member of the Capital 11 team. He's involved in some other things we're doing too, including some new businesses that we're working on. He's got a great kind of upside opportunity in what we're doing. He wouldn't have had that opportunity had he not been willing to take the risk, right, of leaving a very stable corporate job to come work for two entrepreneurs, and take a risk because of some upside, and so it that story kind of illustrates a lot of the things we've been talking about.
That's so indicative of just like how entrepreneurship goes. It's like the people that make the most money, which is certainly not the goal of life, but in business, there's a pretty, profit's a decent sized motivator. And the people that make the most money are often not the smartest. They're not the people that have, even the most connections, all these different things. It's generally the money flows of people that are willing to take the most risk. And that's actually a skill. Like some people say, oh, that's reckless. I don't know.
Yeah.
Look at every single entrepreneur that's made a decent, decent sized company. There was a moment in time where maybe nobody else believed in it. Maybe one or two people are like, that's worth the risk. And if it fails, we'll go get our old job back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think with, risk, it can mean a lot of different things and does mean a lot of different things. And, it's one thing for me now to quote, take a risk by starting something or investing something. Like my life is going to be the same. Like
Yeah.
it's going to be okay. Right. But, the true risk, and this is what I just love so much about entrepreneurs, and not saying this is the way to go, but this is just what happens sometimes. Like when people put all the chips to the center, right? When people are willing to put their house on the line for their business or their idea, for people to, sign a personal guarantee, for people, whatever, like those are things you want to try to avoid, but sometimes they're unavoidable. And it
Yeah.
reminds me of, one of the great entrepreneurs, Mr. Walt Disney, who, very famously multiple times risked everything for the next thing, right? And risked everything he had built to finance Snow White, that then becomes the most successful, one of the most successful movies ever at that time. And then when he had the idea to build Disneyland, and the banks thought he was crazy, and he was willing to leverage everything he had, he was willing to put on the line. And not everyone can do that, from a just sleeping at night standpoint. But man, I have done that in my early days, and I respect the heck out of anyone that does that is literally willing to push all their chips to the center and say, I believe in this. I'm willing to risk it all.
That is so, and I know we're coming up on time. I have so much more I want to ask you. I want to go one more direction. Do you have 5 more minutes?
Sure.
I want to ask you about networking. So that's one of the big skills that we teach to Ignite Gen Z. We have this event coming up at the end of June in Boise, where we're going to be teaching a lot of these, skills to the next generation. You are clearly a master networker, and we have not had this conversation before, but the way I met you was I came to one of your events, and there's like 100 and something people at your office from all over the place here in the Valley that are meeting. We have founders, you have, all kinds of CEOs of different companies, COOs of companies, people looking for investments, people looking to invest.
Yeah.
You have all these people that come together. Like, how big of a role, and I have no idea what the answer is, but how big of a role has like personal relationships from like a networking standpoint been on your career, and like why or why not?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, because I'd say it's probably the most important thing. And I'm a huge believer in it. It's been critical to the success of Capital 11. And if you look at, our team, we're all good at networking and believe in networking. And, if you can keep the alignment of seeking for those win-win relationships, then it makes networking, much easier, right? If it's only about you benefiting, then it's hard to make networking successful. But I think relationships are everything. The old saying, your network is your net worth. And
Mm,
and I really believe in that, because that's where opportunities come, is through your network. That's where, when you need to solve problems or help others, it's your network that you lean on. And it's been so critical to my success, to Capital 11's success. And it's something I always encourage, young people to just get out of their comfort zone. And I have people who'll just reach out to me and be like, hey, can I have 15 minutes of your time on a call, or come by your office or whatever? People I don't know, people that are college students. I always say yes, and most people do, because most people are willing to give
mm,
back. Most people are willing to help if they can help.
mhm,
And we were all in that position where we needed help. So now that, we're in positions where we can help, we want to help. And I think most people are that way. But I'll tell you a great story that illustrates it. And it just kind of reached a cool conclusion here recently. So, I mentioned my son earlier. He's 22. So 4 years ago, he was graduating from high school. And there was a friend of his who wasn't like a close friend, but was in kind of that second circle of friends. And so, he'd been to our house maybe once or twice over high school, but we'd run into him, from time to time. And, that last month of high school, there's all these different events and things that happen.
mhm.
So I'd seen this guy a couple times, and each time he would come up to me and he would say, Mr. Hawks, how are you doing? I mean, I barely knew him. But I was just like, the first time he did that, I was like, man, that's really impressive. That's not like most high school kids to just come up, approach me, talk to me, just ask how I was doing. He wasn't asking for anything. He's just asking how I was doing.
But you're
How are
generally
things?
impressed with this kid just
Very
because, like, the
impressed.
way
Like,
he approaches,
yeah.
shakes your
So
hand.
he literally came up to me 3 different times over the course of a month time frame where I ran into him. And first time I was like, oh, that was pretty impressive. The second time I was asking my son, I was like, what are his plans? Do you know, like, what he's doing, where he's going to school, whatever? Because it was just
Mhm.
like, you could tell he was going to be successful. The third time I was like, I asked him right there. The third time I was like, what are you doing? He said, I'm staying here. I'm going to Boise State. I said, where are you working right now? He was working in the kitchen as a cook. Again, he's 18 years old. Kitchen at a
Yep.
cook at a country club. I said, do you want a job? I mean, I had not interviewed him, had not anything, but I was so impressed with just how he carried him. Like, I
Mm.
could just tell. I could tell he would be successful. And as an 18-year-old kid, like, he could be valuable to our business, obviously at like an entry level position that could grow into something else. So he ended up coming to work for us, just basically 4 years ago right now. Started very entry level, you know admin position, worked his way up, to actually became an underwriter in our auto lending business. I mean, we work very flexible with the school schedule. Like, it was just a great job, great experience, great on resume. He just graduated from Boise State 2 weeks ago, and he just got within our company, kind of in a different division, a great, full-time job, post-college job with our organization that he totally earned, because for four
Mm.
years he has been great. He's been everything, I would have expected of him. Took care of business, going to school, coming to work, doing all those things. He's been great for culture, like all those things. So now he's in a great spot. It's a win for us because he's a great employee and a great member of our team, and he's working in something new that we're working on. But all of that happened. It
Mm.
only happened because, as an 18-year-old high school student, he came up to me multiple times and just talked to me. And I promise you, because I've talked about this, he had no ulterior motive of trying to get, like, he was shocked when I offered him a job, and he wasn't
Yeah.
even sure if he wanted to come work for me. He didn't really know what I did. So it
Right.
wasn't like some master plan that he had. He just was that type of person that I'm going to go and network, right? Maybe
Yeah.
he didn't even fully understand what that was at the time,
Yeah, but he
but
did it.
he did it. I'm
Like,
going to go talk to adults when most kids are like, looking at their phones and talking to their friends and avoiding the adults. He's like, I'm going to go talk to adults here.
that is
And
crazy. I mean, and it's, like, so indicative of, like, how it actually works in your own life, and, like, countless stories over the years. But, like, that sometimes it's fun to hear it. Like, it's such a fresh, like, it was just like an innocent thing. He just walks up. Even if he had an agenda, it would still would have worked. But it's like, walked up, is impressive, good handshake. Similar story, actually, not as eloquent, but there's a kid that I coached when I was, let's see, I was about 22, and I had my first kid and one on the way, and I was coaching high school basketball. And so I thought that I was much older than this guy, but I'm only like 6 years older than this kid I'm coaching in high school basketball. And his name is Cody. And I was always really impressed with him. He was, I think, a sophomore at the time, and I was always just really impressed with his work ethic. And he's always hustling. He's always going for loose balls, and he's just a really aggressive in that nature, but always really respectful. And when he graduated, he asked if he could have a job. And he's like, I really just respect what you've done, and I want to kind of follow in those same shoes. And you're a young guy, and I want to. And I was so impressed just by that one season that I coached him that I was like, of course. And he just texted me the other day. He's going to be taking over one of our offices, in the very near future. And he's been working for us for a couple of years. And he is getting married this year at 21 years old. And he's buying a house. He just bought a house, closed on it. That's why he texted me.
Yeah.
And it's just like, man, 21, owns a house, getting married, having the responsibility. Those are just so impressive to see. And it's all the soft skills like we've been talking this whole time.
Very much, and it's one of the biggest pieces of advice I always give people, which you illustrated, which is like everything you're doing matters and can have consequences in the future. Like that kid, just how he acted and carried himself in a basketball season led him to this, right? Where most people would be like, what do I care about this coach and what this coach thinks about me? Like, how's that going to impact my future? And it happens all the time. I mean, one of my other favorite stories is our retail stores many years ago, almost 20 years ago, kid started working. He was a college kid. I told him, you're a temporary employee. You're going to be here only for 2 months for the Christmas season, and then we don't have a spot for you. It would have been very easy for him to do kind of the minimum required to not get fired, right? Because I'd already told him there's no future here. He didn't think there was a future anyway. He wasn't setting out to work for me in this business the rest of his life.
A side thing, like I'm just going to do it for a couple months.
He's a college student. He's a part-time employee, but he crushed it. He gave it his all. He put everything into it. Even though he wasn't planning to stay there long-term, he treated it like it was the most important thing. He did such a great job that when the Christmas season ended, I was like, why would I get rid of this guy? I'll get rid of someone else. I'm not going to get rid of this guy. This guy's amazing. Well, fast forward 20 years, he is my partner in the retail business. So he worked for me ever since then. And I mentioned to you before we started recording in 2019, these two guys that have run the day-to-day, we made equity partners in the business. So this did turn into his lifelong career that he's now an owner in, all because when he was a college student, working in a retail job in the mall that he would have thought was very inconsequential, he gave it his all.
That what he was told was a dead-end job.
Yes, that he was told was temporary job for 2 months. He said, I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to be exceptional. And look what that led to. And so that's the thing. Your story of a guy on a basketball team, my story of a retail job, the story of the kid at the high school graduation party. Like, if you just have that mentality of you never know who you're going to meet. There's lots of stories about a waiter being hired by someone they're serving. Like, you just don't know. You don't know who you're coming into contact with and who you're going to impress, who you're sitting next to on an airplane, who you're, in line next to in a store, who you're changing the tires for when you work at the tire company. You never know. So just treat it like it all matters and that it's all the most important thing, and good things will happen.
Amen to that. And it's so funny you said the waiter thing. My wife told me one night, we're sitting at this small town restaurant, 1,000 people in the town. There's only 2 restaurants. We're sitting there and she's like, why don't you hire that guy to come sell for you? And fast forward, he now is only like 25 years old and he is running one of our 3 retail locations. It's $1 million plus net business a year. He's managing it full time. I have nothing to do with the day to day of that business.
Yeah.
And he's 25 years old and he has a couple of kids and a beautiful wife. And it's like that, just the way he served the food with a positive, happy attitude in a small podunk restaurant.
And you can feel it in people, right? And I mean, that goes back to the kid, the high school kid from the party. Like I could just, in those brief interactions, I was like, if I could buy stock in, you come across people where you're like, if I could buy stock in that person, I would do so, right? And that's how I felt about that kid at 18 years old. I was like, I don't know what he's going to do with his career, but if I could buy stock right now, I would, because I know he's going to be successful.
Mm.
And having that mentality, it's, your example is a great one. Small town waiter probably thinks this is inconsequential to his life, yet because of the way he carried himself, treated you, let that charisma show through. He was selling in some way.
Yes.
It turned into you offering him a job that's now turned into a career and been a game changer for him. So you just got to take that approach with everything you do, everybody you interact with. You never know what it's going to lead to, including it could be your classmate that later starts Facebook and says, "Hey, do you want to be my co-founder?"
Yeah.
Right?
Because you treated them nice in high
Because
school.
you treat them nice, because you're an honorable guy, because you're whatever the reason. Like, you just never know what opportunity is going to come because of the way you carry yourself, present yourself, treat others, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I have had an incredible conversation, and to quote you, if I could buy stock in Travis, I will. I'm very, very impressed with what you guys have already built, where you guys are going. I'm blessed to be your neighbor next door here, with our offices being so close, and just look forward to so many good things to come. Thanks so much for sharing all the wisdom and just being here today.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.